Joining us right now is former Acting Deputy U.S. Trade Representative under President Obama, Wendy Cutler. She's Vice President at the Asia Society Policy Institute. And Wendy, no doubt this is much better news than most people were anticipating would come out of this, much more progress that took place over the weekend in these talks with China. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. It's funny, we entered the weekend in a trade war, and now we're in some kind of a love fest, if you listen to statements by Secretary Besson and Greer and Hu Feng. So, look, the tariffs are down, and they're down on a temporary basis, however, to a level where trade can continue. Remember, the president signaled 80%. That would have been symbolic. What the two countries agreed to was to lower their tariffs. The U.S. will put a 30% tariff on Chinese imports. China will put a 10% tariff on U.S. imports. And also importantly, China agreed to lift its restrictions on exports of critical minerals and magnets. And that was a key objective for the U.S. delegation this weekend.
Is this a situation where this is basically a never mind? We go back to where we were on April 1st before Liberation Day? Or is this a situation where there really looks like there could be progress to get a better deal for the United States than we'd had previously?
Well, time will tell. I think there's some euphoria now, and there's something in this joint statement by both countries that suggests that both have confidence that their concerns can be addressed. It's easier to say that than to actually sit at the table and reach these solutions. And they only have 90 days to do this at a time when U.S. negotiators are so busy with other countries that are also subject to a similar tariff pause.
But China is the second largest economy in the world. The relationship between the first largest economy and the second largest economy maybe sets the tone for the rest of the world. So I would think the most emphasis will be put on these. Does it put pressure on other countries to come to the table and find some way of reaching a deal with the United States?
Well, I think it does, because I think it shows that the U.S. can be flexible enough to make these kind of deals. And remember, last week, the first deal with another country, the U.K., was announced. So I think that it is a bit promising. What I'm going to be watching, though, the U.S. has been insisting on some what I would call anti-China provisions in these agreements with third countries, particularly with respect to ridding supply chains of Chinese inputs. Let's see if that language remains in other agreements, or other countries feel now that since there is a bit of a détente between the U.S. and China, that these type of provisions may not be as important to the United States.
Although that's been a long-term issue with the last administration, too, with the Biden administration. The idea that the Chinese were producing so much more than they would ever be able to actually use themselves, dumping things around the globe. That puts all of the other trade agreements that we'd put in place, like USMCA, at risk. If you have the Chinese dumping a bunch of things in Mexico, they'd still get shipped up here. What's the use of any of these trade deals to begin with?
Exactly. And this is a key concern of the United States, and one that will need to be addressed, in my view, in the 90-day period if this tariff suspension is to continue. And it's not an easy problem to solve. But I think our trading partners overall are expressing a sigh of relief. They want to see the de-escalation in the U.S.-China trade war. And now that the U.S. tariffs are low enough, we can receive more Chinese goods, which will take some pressure off them.
Wendy, the question that I have on this morning is, it looks like, the markets and the global economy are very happy about all of this. But when you think about the goals that were set out by the administration earlier on, both around tax revenue coming in, about bringing manufacturing back to the United States, all of those goals, how does that factor into this?
Well, it does. And again, remember, these tariffs were to provide negotiating leverage, also to attract investment to the United States, as well as raise revenue. I think a key point here is that in all these deals so far, we've seen that baseline 10% tariff remain. It remained with the UK. It's a core part of this 90-day suspension deal with China. And so that may be the revenue sweetener in all of this. Maybe our tariffs now will never go below that 10% threshold.